Plan procurement management. This is a process of documenting the project procurement decisions, specifying the approach, and identifying potential sellers. Some important terminology within procurement management. Sole source. This is where a buyer asks a specific seller for a proposal with no competition from other vendors. There's a couple of reasons why this could be the case. We may have a pre-existing relationship or some type of preferred vendor status. This is where the vendor may offer a discount to the buyer in exchange for no bid contracts. Using this approach should be justified and viewed as an exception, but it should be mutually beneficial at all times. Tender is often used interchangeably with the term bid. Privity signifies a contractual relationship between two parties. If I sign a contract with another company, say the ABC Corporation, I have privity with them. And if they decide to subcontract, they will have privity with the XYZ Corporation. Even though the XYZ Corporation is working on my project, I have no contractual relationship with them, and any issues I may have with their work need to be taken through the ABC Corporation. Force majeure is a contractual clause that allows for non-performance when unforeseeable and uncontrollable events occur. This is somewhat similar in nature to management reserves. These are those unforeseeable risk events. There's no way that we could have anticipated that this was going to happen. So rather than try to hold each other to account or fight each other in court afterwards, we just dissolve our relationship. Centralized purchasing refers to organizations that have some type of a purchasing, legal department, or perhaps a contracting office that handles contracts and procurements. Decentralized purchasing refers to organizations that do not have such an office, which may lead to situations where the project manager may be doing most of the negotiation, signing, and managing of contracts. These are some basic steps from the procurement process as it's described on page 468 in the PMBOK. The first step should be the preparation of a procurement statement of work or terms of reference. The procurement statement of work should be basically a small slice of our project scope statement. This procurement statement of work will serve as the project statement of work for the seller's organization. We should develop high-level cost estimates and determine a budget for the procurement activity. We should advertise a procurement opportunity in whichever means is normal for our industry. Identify a short list of qualified sellers that we believe have the capacity or capability to deliver. Prepare and issue the bid documents, such as a request for proposal, request for information, or a request for quote. We will receive seller-prepared proposals. We will conduct evaluations for cost, technical, and quality considerations. We will identify the winning proposal. And finally, we will negotiate and sign the contract between buyer and seller. There are various contract types that are available for an organization to use. Different contract types will shift risk between buyer and seller. Different contracts could be useful for different types of purchases. With a fixed price contract, we are offering a fixed amount of money for the product, services, or results offered by the seller. A firm fixed price is the most solid. This is where we say, I will pay you $20 for one widget. Regardless of how much it costs you to produce and ship that widget, you will only receive $20. No other considerations are made. A fixed price plus incentive fee tries to motivate you to meet certain criteria. So perhaps I want fast delivery or better quality. I can offer you an additional amount of money depending on how well you meet that criteria. A fixed price with economic price adjustment is typically used for longer term contracts. So if we think about multi-year contracts where we deal with commodities that could possibly have fluctuating prices. In some situations, businesses will not want to sign long-term contracts because of the inherent risk of these fluctuating prices and the negative impact it could have on them. By offering a fixed price with EPA, it kind of shares that risk between the buyer and seller. So what we might say is we will purchase widgets at $20 a piece. However, based upon the shifting price point of the raw materials needed to build the widgets, we will share any savings or overruns in a 60-40 split. This allows us to maintain a contract without any worries about commercial impracticability or having the contract thrown out. A cost reimbursable contract is where the buyer will reimburse the seller for all approved expenses. Now, obviously, nobody works strictly for reimbursement, so we have to give them some type of a profit above and beyond just reimbursement. The cost plus percentage of cost, or CPPC, is seldom used as it's not allowed in federal procurements anymore. This is basically going to a restaurant and telling the waiter that you are a very good tipper, I'll give you 25%, and then telling them I just want to have some drinks, an appetizer, an entree, and some dessert. Well, they're going to be very sure to bring you as much as they possibly can. It's going to be the escargot, the 18-year Scotch. It's going to be the bone-in ribeye, and it's going to be the most expensive dessert that they can possibly find, because they know that the amount of profit they receive will be tied directly to the amount of reimbursable expenses that they incur. A cost plus fixed fee is where we will reimburse the seller for any expenses incurred that are considered acceptable, plus a fixed fee based upon initial estimates as to how much the procurement activity will cost. A cost plus incentive fee is where we're trying to keep costs down or perhaps trying to expedite the schedule. So we tell them that we will reimburse you for all of your expenses and we will give you additional funds based upon how low you can keep the costs or how quickly you can deliver. A cost plus award fee tends to be a little bit more subjective. This is where we have certain criteria that we want to have met, but it's not necessarily very easy to measure. Typically, this is used for situations where we're unsure how much scope can be fulfilled. So if we think about highly technical solutions or software development, if we say that we have a list of requirements and within this procurement statement of work, if you can deliver on 80% of them, I will give you $100,000. If you can deliver on 70%, you will get 75,000. If you can deliver on 50%, I'll give you 40,000. It can get kind of tricky though, because if we have any ambiguity within these requirements or within whatever the criteria is that we're doing the award for, it can end up in a dispute status. Finally, we have our times and materials contract. This is where we will reimburse the seller for all of the expenses that they have for their personnel, so far as the time that they expend, and also any materials or any other resources that they need in order to do the work. Again, different contract types can be used to shift risk between buyer and seller. In fixed price contracts, the risk is on the seller. The buyer knows that they're going to pay a certain amount of money. The seller knows that they're receiving a certain amount of money. The trick of it is that the buyer needs to be very precise when they specify products or services being procured. If the seller is asked to do something that is not within that procurement statement of work once a contract is signed, they are not legally obligated to do so unless a change request is submitted. At that point, they can request more money in order to compensate them for the extra work. In a cost reimbursable contract, the risk tends to be on the buyer. The seller doesn't really have a lot of risk. They are going to recover any legitimate costs incurred. So any approved categories of cost will be reimbursable. Plus, they'll receive some type of a fee that will give them some type of a profit, regardless of how much money they spend. In time and materials contracts, the risk is on the buyer. They can be left open-ended and may be subject to a cost increase. This is good for staff augmentation when a precise statement of work cannot be quickly prescribed. However, as quickly as possible, we do want to have a precise statement of work prepared and switch to a more formalized type of contract, even if it is a cost reimbursable contract. Here we see a graphical representation of the shifting of the risk, relative risks among the different contract types. The point of total assumption is something that occurs in almost every type of contract that has some type of upper limit on what the buyer is willing to pay. So for every fixed price contract, we have a point of total assumption. Once the seller has reached the point of total assumption, they will assume responsibility for all cost overruns. Now for certain contract types, there's a situation where there is a share point prior to the point of total assumption. And this is where the cost overruns are shared in a predetermined ratio between buyer and seller. When the point of total assumption is reached, the seller assumes any additional project costs, and the share ratio switches to 0-100 between buyer and seller. The seller doesn't want to be in this situation because now it's eating into their profit on a dollar for dollar basis. The seller must keep costs in line to prevent hitting the point of total assumption. So we have some terminology here. The ceiling price is the maximum amount of money that the buyer agrees to pay. They will not go above this amount. Anything past the ceiling price, the seller will be responsible for. We have the target cost. This is the initially negotiated figure for the estimated contract cost. This is how much we think it's going to cost. The target profit or fee, the initially negotiated profit, because again, the seller has to make a profit. The target price. The target price will be the target cost plus the target profit. And then the share ratio. What is the ratio that we will use for underruns or overruns and how they will increase or decrease profit? Here we see an example of a point of total assumption calculation. If our target cost, the initially negotiated figure for the estimated contract cost, is $1 million, and our target profit, the initially negotiated profit, is $200,000, then our target price will be $1.2 million. Our ceiling price, which is again the maximum price the buyer is willing to pay, will be $1.5 million. The share ratio for any type of overrun will be 80% on the buyer and 20% on the seller. The calculation is the point of total assumption is the ceiling price minus target price divided by buyer's share ratio plus target cost. In this case, it's $1.375 million. So at this point, the seller effectively assumes all further costs alone. They can still make a profit up until they hit the ceiling price. Once they hit the ceiling price, they have to finish the entire procurement activity on their own. They will not be receiving any further funds. Some tools and techniques we'll be using as part of planning procurement management include data gathering. Market research is going to be very important, especially as we look at the industry and try to look at specific vendor capabilities and conduct an analysis as to whether or not they're going to be able to deliver what we need, when we need it, and how we need it. Our teams may be able to leverage information from conferences, reviews, and any other sources to look at the capabilities of the market and these vendors. Within data analysis, we have our make or buy analysis. This is where we decide whether work should be done in-house or if it should be procured. We should consider all of the related costs, direct and indirect, and also our abilities to deliver based upon the quality that we'd have within whatever we create. Source selection analysis analyzes how the winning seller will be chosen. It may just be a matter of lowest price, such as a lowest price technically acceptable contract. We may look at qualifications or the technical approach. If we have a sole source, then that's going to make it a little bit easier for us. However, we should include this information in the bid documents, that way we can keep track of it as we move forward. Outputs from this process include the procurement management plan. This is going to describe how the project team will acquire goods and services from outside of the performing organization. It will identify what types of contracts we will use, what types of risk management issues we foresee, and whether independent estimates are used and need to be evaluated, and which actions the project manager takes unilaterally. Any assumptions that we make and any constraints that we identify, lead times, and especially for larger procurements, this could be several months. And if we have any pre-qualified sellers, we want to identify them here as well. The procurement strategy should include information on how the procurement will progress through the various phases, what types of agreements will be used, and on the delivery method. In some situations, we may have to allow subcontracting. If we do, then there is an issue of privity, as we had previously discussed. We need to ensure that we have some type of mechanism in place to ensure that all contractors and subcontractors will be performing appropriately towards our project's deliverable. For bid documents, we typically have three main categories. A request for information is a formal request for preliminary information. This could simply be an email to potential vendors asking them, do you perform this type of service? Is this something that your organization is capable of doing? An invitation for bid, also sometimes called a request for quote, is basically concerned just on the pricing. This is typically done for some type of commodity purchase. If we need copier paper or if we need to purchase diesel, cement, or lumber, then we're not going to be worried about too much other than the price points. A request for proposal tends to be more concerned with something more complex. So if we have a situation where we're unsure whether or not the vendor would be able to deliver on it, we may ask them to create a proposal showing how they would deliver on it. Typically, with an RFP, we're not concerned with the price points. Price points will come later. This is almost like interviewing for a job and compensation being one of the last things you discuss. The first thing we want to ensure is that they do have an ability to go ahead and deliver what it is that we need. The procurement statement of work is developed from the project scope baseline and defines only that portion of the project scope that is to be included within the related contract. If the procurement statement of work is not part of our project scope baseline, then it's not really adding any value towards our deliverable and probably shouldn't be done at all. So basically, we're just going to be outsourcing a slice of our scope. The procurement statement of work should also describe the procurement item in sufficient detail to allow prospective sellers to determine, are they capable of providing these products, services, or results that we're attempting to purchase from them. We don't want to leave any ambiguity. If we do find ourselves in a situation where the seller is unable to deliver, we don't want it to be for lack of effort on our part to ensure that they knew what they were getting into. The statement of work may include specifications, quantity desired, quality levels, performance data, period of performance, work location, and other considerations as applicable. Source selection criteria are the factors that we are going to use to select the right seller. There are many different examples. We may look at the technical capability, inherent risk, management approach, technical approach, warranty, financial capacity to ensure that the company won't go under right after we sign a contract with them, their production capacity and whether or not it will be able to meet our demand, business size or type, any past performance they had with us or possibly any other companies that we can get references from, intellectual property rights for any proprietary information that they may have. We also have our make or buy decisions. Did we decide to make it in-house, or did we decide to be cheaper, easier, or resulting in higher quality to have a seller provide it for us? Independent cost estimates. This is how we are going to make a determination. Is the seller's bid within the ballpark of where it should be? Now, we may prepare our own independent estimates as a buyer, or we could have an outside estimator. We could either pay a professional estimator or perhaps pay a disinterested seller who does not want to bid on this contract but does the same type of work. We want to make sure that the bids are either not too high or not too low. If the bid is too high, well, obviously that's not going to be a good deal for us. But if the bid is too low, that should be a point of concern as well. That could indicate that they don't fully understand the type of work that they will be doing, or they just don't have sufficient experience. Some decisions that are made during this process could result in change requests. This can affect various aspects of the project management plan, its subsidiary plans, and other components. Project documents updates could include our requirements documentation and traceability matrix. We want to record who will be doing this work and fulfilling these requirements as work proceeds. The risk register should be updated with whatever set of risks that the seller will bring to our organization. Lessons learned register as we conduct this process, and the stakeholder register because we will be introducing new stakeholders to our project. Finally, we have our milestone list, which is going to be the very high-level major milestones of when the seller is expected to deliver results. Organizational process assets are updated as part of this process as well. Obviously, there's a lot of legal considerations within this process, so we want to ensure we're doing our due diligence as we move forward and store all the documentation appropriately. Plan procurement management, learning assessment. Describe the purpose of this process in your own words. The purpose of this process is to develop and document a procurement approach and identify potential sellers. We can use contract types to shift risks in a given contract. This process will result in contracts being signed. True or false? This is false. What types of enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets should be considered here? EEFs could include organizational risk tolerance and market conditions, while OPAs could be looking at procurement policies and lessons learned from past similar projects. The risk is highest for the seller in a firm fixed price contract. At the point of total assumption, the buyer stops paying anything more altogether. True or false? This is false. That point is known as the ceiling price. The procurement document that describes the procurement item in detail is the procurement statement of work.